Hi everybody, this is Genova Chen, the creative director from that game company. Here with me are Matt Nava, our art director.
Hi.
John Edwards, the lead engineer.
Hey guys.
Nick Clark, the lead designer.
Hello.
And the famous Austin Wintory, the composer behind the music of Journey.
Hi.
Yeah, actually, before we start the game, Austin, here we are listening to the very theme of Journey. Can you tell us a little bit about, where the music comes from? What were the inspiration?
Well, the music started at the very, very beginning, which is part of why I love this project so much, is because it was from day one. So we got together and talked like a week or something after Flower had come out, and we talked about Joseph Campbell and the monomyth, and just kind of had a discussion about the emotions of the game. We didn't talk about music in any concrete form, like strings or any of those sorts of like colors that you were interested in. It was purely a discussion of the emotions, and so I really thought it was amazing. And like I just loved what you were talking about, and so it was one of those weird cases of going back to the studio, and then immediately this just sort of came out that same day. And but it was always supposed to be like a demo, like a proof of concept. I didn't expect that it would be like in the trailers and on the cross-media bar and all that stuff, because what you're hearing, other than the orchestra, is exactly what I did on that day in '09.
Let's start the game then. Yeah, it is kind of strange that the very first music ended up being in the final game. I guess that means how good it was.
I don't know. It's at least was right. We can't tell if it was good, but
it was definitely an inspirational track for the visuals of the game. We paired it with our first kind of proof of concept trailer.
Yeah, back then when we were first pitching the game to Sony, Matt, and Jackie at the time worked on this proof of concept trailer. I think it was out somewhere, so you could find it online. There's a very different character compared to what it is in the final game.
He had arms.
Right, the character is more...
And it didn't have the mountain either. It was still the kind of canyon,
right,
like granite wall.
Trophy.
Okay, well...
This is not the first time we've tried to record
we're playing this game, but we can start a new journey. No problem.
So actually, one thing to note here is that you don't see the mountain initially when you start up the game. We wanted to hide that reveal for when you reach the top of the first hill. But when you come back to the game a second time, we do show you the mountain after you've already beaten the game.
That was a very last-minute decision that Matt pushed through with all his mind.
But I think it was definitely
the table.
Definitely the right choice.
Yeah, I didn't ever notice that until you guys pointed that out like a week ago. As many thousands of times as I've played this, I never...
So some cool sand tech here.
John, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so you can kind of see we got this sparkling field of sand, millions of grains of sand being rendered on the PS3, which was a project-long process to make happen. Which, Martin Middleton and, really, the whole team worked on this.
And project long means 3 years. Like, we spent 3 years making Journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this opening went through a lot of iterations, but what we came to was this kind of vague reference to the star-like effect you see in the end of the game, so that when you play it a second time through, you get more meaning out of that.
Plus, it was just kind of a way to reset the player before they begin the journey.
That was something you guys did on Flower to great effect,
right.
I thought. And I remember, because that was one of the first pieces of music that I wrote, because it was like one of the few kind of knowns, because it was, like, okay, in Flower we started with this kind of like burst of sound to kind of try to clean the slate emotionally of the player. So let's try something sort of similar for this.
That's also the reason why we chose to start with a big, kind of long white color shot, and then gradually move to faster shots.
Yeah, kind of no visual.
Yeah.
Now we've just popped the mountain up.
Yeah, so now you get the mountain reveal, and it feels really awesome. Oh, there it is.
Moved a mountain.
A lot of people were telling me how great the music was in Journey because there's all these very cool reviews. You know, it feels grand, but really it's the music that's happening kind of subconsciously while, you know, the transition happens. You know, this is a very noticeable shot. The other one we'll talk about later.
It's funny, I've gotten a lot of feedback like that from people saying, you know, I really loved this game, but especially because of the music. And I always turn that back on them and say, you know, as flattered as I am by that, I actually don't agree. Because the music is like as a result of the game. I didn't make anything and then just say, hey, let's find a place for this. Everything was always directly inspired by what you were doing, and art direction and the color palettes and the way in which the player moved and everything. And so I'm always, to me, it's like separating them makes no sense to me at all.
So this is like the first tutorial sequence here that we teach the player how to use their flight ability, but you can actually skip this whole sequence. Like, we don't ever force the player to go to this building and collect this first secret, which was actually somewhat of a problem in some of the earlier playtests, but we made it look attractive enough that almost all the players do end up just directing themselves here. But one thing that was important to us in development was to never force a decision upon the player, so you could skip it if you wanted to.
This statue is a broken version of the Sphinx that you see at the Ancestors, and it's actually kind of silly because there used to be an ancestor here. We used to have two ancestors in this level.
There used to be the seventh ancestor.
Yes.
I liked the very old version where the ancestor came out and you were like lateral to the mountain, and you both would turn, and then the ancestor went flying off.
He would actually fly all the way to the mountain, and you'd have to watch him.
Yeah.
And it was quite silly.
It's one of those funny things that at the time it didn't strike me as silly at all, and then the moment we moved past it, I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's pretty silly. In the same way that there's a lot of music in the game that I totally wrote in earnest, and then we replaced with something else. And when I go back and listen to it, I'm like, that is terrible. How did that ever strike me as remotely, like, at all acceptable?
I remember the first time we got the ancestor sequences in, it was pretty awesome. But looking back, those were not super good.
Yeah, exactly. It's
definitely
funny
an iterative process. It took a long time.
Why don't you tell us about these paintings?
So yeah, these also took a lot of iteration to get to a stage that was something that everybody felt good about. It was, for a long time, they were just these very hard to understand, well maybe there still are, but gameplay elements. They had a lot more like sequences and all sorts of things.
They used to be like animated where you could activate them multiple times, and each time there would be a different image, but then people thought there was some mechanic where they'd have to like activate a certain number of times to like unlock something.
Yeah, puzzle.
Yeah, it was like a puzzle or something.
We found that the simple solution was actually the better solution in that case.
There used to be cloth tapestries hanging, but then you could run into them and the cloth would fly into the wall and it would look really bad. So
I thought when it was like displaying correctly, the hanging actual cloth that would then animate was really cool looking. It had a lot of bugs, but I always thought that was an awesome visual of like when you would sing at a tapestry and it would like light would come off it.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was better feedback, but it also had the
problem.
Yeah,
really.
it's too much feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things we always see is, you know, there are these parts in the game where we maybe don't want the player to focus too much. And really the only way to do that is to remove feedback. Like even negative feedback is still going to attract the player's attention. Like even the cloth going into the wall.
Right.
Players love to see that. And so we just have to simplify.
Focus on that. Yeah.
Speaking of feedback, this part was always kind of a surprise because it gives you a lot of good feedback, flying feedback.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of moments in the game that to me felt very, like the word that always came to mind was charming, where like, because you create this landscape that looks super bleak and kind of desolate, and then like that little moment where it's almost like a flock of birds lifting you up.
Yeah, it's the first like lively moment you come across, I think, in the game.
Yeah, it's very.
It's like an initial hint that there is still life in the environment, and we do sort of, that was intentional. Like we do kind of build up the life that we present to you incrementally as you play. And that was sort of the first reveal.
In the same way we build up these scenes, here we don't even show you the ancestor's face. He's just a silhouette. And that was not how it was originally. We did that to make these maintain an interesting quality further through the game.
I love these sort of story painting sequences. They were really interesting from a sound design standpoint too, because it was really easy to like overdo it, I thought, and make it too sound designy for something that's kind of only semi-animated. But I really like the balance. Steve Johnson, the sound designer, everything arrived at. Same thing with the music. I made it a point not to like score it as a movie, but to kind of go for the overall idea that it was communicating. So that it wasn't some cheesy like animated storyboard, because that's what it would look like if you got too specific.
Yeah, it's a fine line. We want to keep the story, very readable, but at the same time we want it to be mysterious. So I think the music and sound definitely had contributed to that, abstract effect.
So there are a lot of cues, like the gates opening right there was the kind of the cue to, okay, go forward. Even though we never tell the player go forward, those little hints like, oh, the gate opens, now the player kind of intuitively knows that they're able to progress. So we try to incorporate those types of design elements to subconsciously lead the player through the game.
Also, you notice that there was another character right there at the end, foreshadowing that you might meet someone on your journey here.
Actually, the only AI-controlled character in the whole experience is that little glimpse of one at the end of the hallway.
Which is I really love, because you almost, especially if it's on a smaller TV, you it's like you swear you just hallucinated that person.
A mirage in the desert?
Yeah, exactly. Because it used to be long ago, it was at the end of this area, and you would be like running up the sand dune, and you'd see them and they'd like run away from you. This is a much more sort of subtle and elegant design for that.
So this is the first area in the game where the internet actually tries to connect you between players, and we don't know when we will be running into them, but this is the first stage where it's possible.
And because of that, we tried to design the whole stage to make it easier for people to find each other, and that's why we put the big cliff on the side, make it so that you have to figure out how to get out of this area, so you spend more time in this area.
Yeah, and like the puzzles are kind of arranged in this triangular fashion, so you kind of retraverse the same areas over and over again. Whereas some of the later levels, like the level after this, it's more linear, where you're going from the start to the end. But in this area, it's more likely to run across someone because you're spending more time in sort of a more confined area.
Yeah, so Nick mentioned the triangular shape. What the player is climbing right now is one of the, according to the internet, the stone serpent. There are 3 of them, and they just form this triangle. So when you move from one to the other, it's very likely you can see the other players.
Have you seen, based on like what people put on Facebook and Twitter, have people been able to pick up that those are, the machines that have people commented a lot about that and seen?
I think that that's something that players realize after their first playthrough. When they first come through this area, what we really wanted them to see is these kind of sculptural ruined things and not really worry about them too much. And then on the second playthrough or third playthrough, see them again and have more context and understand maybe what this kind of arrangement would mean for the history of the world and stuff like that.
Hopefully, even on the first playthrough, there is sort of a subconscious cue that this is a world here that you're in, and something happened.
Yeah.
That's usually one of those things that I like to build into the music. Like if you want to plant a seed, you know, with somebody that can later be recalled, you know, you do it through the music. Though I didn't actually do that here. Like I have definite sort of musical colors and things that I associate with these stone serpents later on that I don't use here. Partly because you're not interacting with them in a way that's direct enough that it would have been clear that that's what I was pointing at, but also because it just, as subtle as that would be in certain ways, it still somehow feels like that would have been really over the top to be like, look, a little touch of ominousness, you know, like, you know.
Yeah, and you know, it's the player's experience too.
Exactly. That's kind of even, that's by far the bigger point, is in the same way that you guys aren't trying to force a player down some super ultra linear path that spoon feeds everything to them. The score, both in terms of its adaptivity and in terms of its sort of emotional content, was trying to avoid forcing the player to feel a certain way. The way I've been describing it to people is that it's like, in the same way as the game, you're creating an environment that they can kind of choose to live in however they want. And as opposed to, like, you are now on the bridge, you know? Although, I guess we are about to get that cue.
Well, I think it is the balance of those two things, definitely. And, like, this cue is pretty short, but it does feel nice when you first start flying across the bridge.
Drunk. Yeah, I love that about the game, in general, is that you play it and, like, depending on the mood you're in, it's actually a very different feeling game. Like, it can be really emotional, or it can be just sort of visually beautiful, but in a way that's actually very sort of sedate. But you can really get lost in it and have a really profound experience.
Seems like we haven't connected to anyone.
Yeah, could this be it's here early in the morning? Gamers don't play a game in the morning.
Early morning on a Thursday or Friday?
Yeah.
What day is it?
We're developers.
On a Schmonday?
So here you see for the first time the ancestor's face. These ancestors weren't always in this kind of white space that's kind of this meditation or vision of the character. They were originally in the actual world and they came out and it was quite silly. Yes.
It felt a little strange, I think.
They were very literal, and what we ended up with does allow the player to interpret it a bit more how they want, how comfortable they are with imagining that the ancestor is a physical thing or might just be a memory.
Yeah, and some people, they're like gods. They're like a deity, and for some people they are like a remnant of the whatever civilization this is, or they're maybe a reflection of you.
And I think that in our whole design process, we really wanted to encourage players to make their own kind of decisions about those kind of things.
Well, I think on the team, even amongst the team members, it was one way of getting everyone to be able to see the same story, is we didn't all have to interpret these characters the same way.
Yeah, no, I remember observing that early on, was that everybody had their own sort of take on what an area was or what an object was or these characters. And I love that it's like, it's built into the design that of course players are going to have their own interpretation because the team itself does not have some unified, like, secret backstory. It's actually pretty loose internally as well.
Maybe Matt does.
Well, yeah, they're called Rythulians.
Yes.
And,
Maybe this is the opportunity for us to reveal the backstory.
No, I don't think we should ever do that. So this
was the world of flower after the apocalypse. And
some players would like to think so.
So this is
definitely
this has been one of my favorite levels. This is the one I'd go to, like, when it was late at night, right before E3 or something, and we were working pretty hard. And I could just spend like an hour and a half just wandering the deserts.
Yeah, in the E3 or the post E3 public beta, it only really went through to this area, and people would talk about how they played the game for like 2 or 3 hours, which meant that they basically spent a lot of time in just this area.
This reminds me of our trip to the Pismo Beach, which at the beginning of the development, we actually went to find this giant dune beach next to the ocean. Oh wait, it looks like we're connected to someone.
I got a buddy.
Someone's.
Oh, there they
Oh,
are.
hello.
They have a much longer scar.
Well, we haven't been collecting.
Yeah, we don't need to feel
symbols.
threatened.
So it looks like they
I
are
feel
also on the second round. They have the same
Pattern.
pattern. Yeah, it means the second time plays of the game.
So these little cloth fish creatures, as we called them, they started off very scripted, but we thought that wasn't very fun or very replayable, and so Brian, one of our game designers, actually sort of rewrote them to be entirely AI driven, with some like scripting hints, but they are a lot more reactive and natural now than they were earlier on in development.
They kind of serve as a proxy for another player, but obviously they're sort of a more primitive life form. So since we don't have a human AI, it still works pretty well. They can follow you kind of like a dog.
Right, and they are kind of like the next sort of hint or step in the presence of life in this world. So there is definitely an evolution in terms of how we present that.
We also have a hint here. Notice all the creature that's made of claws are coming out of the stone serpent.
Yeah, that's the first, well, the next kind of reveal in that whole narrative of the game.
I'm totally with you, John. Like, this was such a nice. I mean, you know, we wanted it to have that kind of playful sandbox quality, and I feel like it really did kind of come together that way, because it's just so sort of pleasant and fun, and also met. It's just like looks so awesome.
One of the early kind of things we were trying to do with the game is we were kind of using a hiking metaphor for a variety of reasons, but we were just trying early on to make a game that you could enjoy where you didn't have some superpower or super speed, where you could just walk through like a normal person would when they go into nature for a hike. You could kind of go at about that speed and just enjoy the environment and live in a place. And so we had to work really hard on making that kind of environment that is just naturally enjoyable. And then we still have to make the player really fast.
Yeah, so this is the level which we realize we have to create a mechanics like surfing, because if the entire dune is just walking, it feels very repetitive, and so, you know, I think at the time I was playing Tiny Wing, the iPhone game. I remember showing it to Nick, and John was saying, you know, like, this game has a nice rhythm, there's up and downs, and you know, if you climb a dune, you woke up, maybe, you know, when you come down, it felt differently, and so the surfing mechanics really kind of become the savior of, you know, the potential of walking through miles and miles of sand, you know, without any change of pace.
I mean, it's not maybe exactly realistic, but I do think it captures the feeling.
Definitely, we didn't go for realism with any of our kind of references to reality, the sand, whatever. We went for the feeling,
Yeah.
and the kind of mood that we want the player to experience. And I think that is kind of a unifying concept in that game company's design.
What it is, it's going for the reality in your head when you're experiencing it. Like, this was very much modeled from our experience at Pismo Dunes, but it doesn't really reflect, none of us could surf on sand the way these characters can, but
Say, yeah, you watch the footage and it's like stumbling and falling over.
One thing to note in this level, in terms of just color and design, it's interesting, is the green sky. We wanted this level to be kind of a noon atmosphere, bright, sunny, happy, but I really didn't want to have a blue sky, because I tried to save that blue color for the very end of the game to make it kind of a special reward for the end of your journey. So in order to preserve that, I chose green instead.
and I think that works really well. I mean, it keeps the world feeling very mysterious, but at the same time, this does feel very open and refreshing, and it's like a blue sky.
Yeah, it's unique.
So at some point the game had a sandstorm where you actually have to seek for shelter in order to survive. But eventually the sandstorm is more like become this particular area.
Yeah, that was a much better choice, because this is a built thing, you know. I feel like it speaks to the sort of subtext of the narrative and things. Then
An opportunity to talk about a little bit about the architecture of the game and how it was designed. It was also designed based on constraints from gameplay, kind of like the choice to make sky green. One funny thing is there's a lot of archways and things in the journey. Originally I wanted them to be round arches, but due to our constraints with collision detection, we needed to have arches that did not have surfaces like that, so we chose to make them these kind of stair-step arches because they work better with our tech, and that kind of influenced the entire design of the architecture.
I love when that kind of thing happens, though, where you end up at something that you actually can't imagine it any other way, but it was arrived at through dealing with constraints.
Could you imagine it any other way, Matt? I often felt pretty guilty about that, but it's amazing what Matt did, and Matt and Jackie, the art team, with the limitations.
Yeah.
To me, it looks like Journey. Like it's really. I mean, you know, I'm biased because, well, I'm just biased for a whole lot of reasons. But I really can't imagine it done differently.
This definitely has influences from lots of different ancient architecture, Greek architecture, Islamic architecture.
And you
But try to
talked
make
in one of the
something
things
new.
about the Native American.
Also, yes, Native American rug design was
Yeah.
a big influence on the architecture. It's interesting. So these sequences, the ancestor shows you, were all done in one weekend. That was a late night.
One late night, extended for 58 hours.
It was definitely right up on the deadline. But I think it worked out really well.
That was, we generally don't crunch very much at that game company, but Matt, knew it had to happen right at the end, and yeah, amazingly pulled through. Yeah, pretty much the entire set of cinematics for the game.
Yeah, they to me totally work, because that was one of those that I was really sort of struggling with musically, because I was having a hard time pinning down if they felt like they were final or not. And then at one point, just like out of nowhere, suddenly there was all these things in there that were really great. It was like from one moment to the next.
Oh,
your friend.
is he
maybe,
wanting to unlock the meditation trophy with you?
Join him. Sometimes it's good to take a moment.
he
Oh
disconnected.
my goodness.
He just meditated super hard.
Well, sometimes on our life's journey, people we know will go away.
And that was,
Is that cancer?
Oh.
Yes, that was the cancer feature that was added to the game.
his fish is still there. How sad.
Well, now we're gonna test Nick's networking code.
Yeah, so networking.
Rock
this
solid.
This cutscene was quite a pain. I think there is a bug here, but
Don't reveal.
Don't tell
it'll
them.
be fixed in the patch.
I swear.
That
By
was
the time you
first,
play it.
that was also the first.
Actually,
overt,
in general, networking, like multiplayer cutscenes, were very difficult for us to handle all the cases of, okay, what if you start the cutscene and then 10 seconds later someone else runs in and wants to start the cutscene? What happens?
We had a very sophisticated engine system of brute force designer work.
Right.
So
Yeah, all of the networking was kind of up to the designers to make sure.
We didn't create a
worked.
situation that was impossible to network. That was cool.
And actually, speaking more of the networking, we put a lot of constraints on ourselves to fix it by design, I suppose. So like we simulated 1 second latencies at all times, so we couldn't have any design that required low latency. We also simulated lots of packet loss at all times.
You're gonna get the symbol.
that way we could ensure that even if you connect with someone in Japan, it's still a very good experience. It's the same experience you'd have
Right.
if you're connected to your next door neighbor.
And so a lot of the initial multiplayer mechanics we tried didn't end up working out because of those networking constraints we put on ourselves.
That's a pro move right there.
You have to have played this game a few times to know the
A couple
secrets.
times.
We've played this game a few times. So this whole area is kind of an interesting